lies in wait amidst your dreams, where nothing is ever how it seems. It is a portal to a terrifying world beyond the doorway to nightmare.
Don't Turn Around by Winslow Swan. Audiobook narrated and produced by Edward James Beesley. So what do we do now? To say that Johnny's sleepover was a success was very much an understatement. He had invited most of his friends as well as a few classmates to come and spend the night in the converted basement of his home. There had been plenty of room, plenty of rough housing, and plenty to eat and drink thanks to his mother's incessant cooking. Video games had been played on the large screen television that had taken up an entire wall, and now with the lights turned down low, sleeping bags had been rolled out onto the floor and the boys were getting ready to settle in for the night. No one really wanted to be the first to go to sleep for fear of what the others might do to them. So they all sat huddled in their bags, talking of school and girls and the coming football season. "Well, Johnny," asked his best friend Mark, "what do we do now?" "Why don't we tell ghost stories?" Frank offered. "It's only for little kids," Johnny said. All of the boys were around 13 years old and tried to act much older. Johnny had been deemed the leader of the group since his parents moved to Cash's Valley last year. He had been very likeable, with an imagination that would sometimes run towards the dangerous. His group of friends included Frank, the follower, who seemed to always be in the background, Mark, his best friend, who had the same interests as Johnny, Sam, the bigger of all the boys, with aspirations of playing for Texas A&M someday, and Greg, the analytical mind who always helped with the really tough math problems. "So, what do you say? Anyone know any really good, gross ghost stories?" Frank asked. "I don't think that is a good idea." The small voice came from the darkest corner of the room. The boy huddled in his sleeping bag and had a pale look about him. He carried with him the aura of a person that is constantly looking over his shoulder for the next mean trick to be carried out on him as the butt of the joke. Johnny had only invited him because his mother had asked. If it had been up to Johnny, he would have said no. He really didn't like the little creepy kid who had moved in with his creepy family into the housing project only 2 weeks ago. "Johnny," his mother had explained, "I've met Billy's parents and they seem quite nice. Billy doesn't have any friends here, and you have always been so good at making people feel welcome." It was true what his mother had told him, but there had been something about Billy that, well, frightened was the only word that Johnny could think of. "Okay, he can come," Johnny finally acquiesced. "Why shouldn't we tell ghost stories?" Sam had asked Billy. "It can be dangerous," Billy said, his voice sounding hollow. "What's so dangerous about telling a story?" Johnny asked, trying to sound braver than he really felt. The basement had grown quiet, and the lights seemed to have dimmed a little lower. At least, that was what Johnny thought. The darkness in the corner that Billy was in also seemed to grow a little darker, enveloping the strange boy. "There are a lot of things that shouldn't be told," Billy said. "Like what?" Frank asked. "Scary things," Billy whispered. "So," Mark began, looking into the corner, "do you know any scary things?" Johnny grinned, knowing that Mark was obviously setting the boy up for some stupid joke. "More than you can imagine. My dad is a researcher, and I help him sometimes in his work. He tells me not to read some of the papers, but I do it anyway." The boys snickered. "Tell us something," Johnny said. "Please, no. I don't want to," Billy implored. "Listen, this is my party, and I want you to tell us something," Johnny said, his voice a little edgier than he had intended to make it. "Yeah," Frank chimed in. or tell us something really scary. Billy sighed. He knew that this was going to happen. He never should have said anything, just kept quiet and gone to sleep. Sometimes he thought to himself he should just keep his big mouth shut. Okay, he said. Just remember, I don't want to do this. Yeah, sure, they all agreed, wondering when the joke was coming. As Billy emerged from the sleeping bag, he made his way to the other side of the room. The boys all turned and faced him as he sat cross-legged on the floor. So, he began, you want to hear something that's really scary? They all agreed. And you understand, I'm not responsible for what happens. Again, they agreed. We can stop any time, and I want you to stop me, especially before anything happens. What could happen? Sam asked. I just want you to be sure, Billy whispered. The air in the room grew heavier, and the darkness seemed to follow Billy and cloak around him. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up, making strange sounds as it blew around the house. Now, Billy said, making eye contact with all of them. Which one of you is not afraid? I mean, which one of you is the bravest and can do exactly what I tell them? Johnny, always wanting to show how brave he was, moved to the center of the group. Fine, Johnny. Now, just look directly at me, and no matter what I tell you or what I say, don't turn around. Remember that. Don't turn around, Billy said, his voice taking on a slight menacing quality. Yeah, sure, Johnny said, and gulped loudly. He could already feel his heart beginning to pound, and began to wonder if this had been a good idea. Now, everyone, just sit quiet, very still, and whatever you do, don't turn around. The little group of boys only shook their heads. The room became quiet, with only the sound of the wind and the breathing of the boys. Do you hear that? Billy asked. Don't turn around. Someone is coming up behind you. Now don't turn around. Johnny wasn't sure if it was a trick of his own mind or just the house settling, but he was at once aware of the sound of a footstep behind him from the other side of the room. I wonder if it's your dad coming down the stairs to check on us? Yeah, that's probably it. I don't think that the ghost of this house would hurt us. Oh, that's right. You don't know about this house. My dad did some research when we moved here. That was how we met your mom. It seems that a horrible murder took place here about 10 years ago. A man ripped the heart out of his own son and buried him in the basement. This basement. The other boys began to feel apprehensive and nervous. Nothing like that ever happened, Johnny said. But in the back of his mind, he wondered. Really? Billy asked. It isn't the kind of thing your parents would tell you about, would they? The others agreed. Wait, did you hear that? Don't turn around. It sounded like another footstep. Getting closer. Now don't turn around. Yeah, that's right. The man took his son right into the basement, this basement, and cut out the heart. He said the boy had been evil and possessed. He thought that some demon lived in the house and had taken his son, so he was trying to set his son's soul free. Don't turn around now. I thought I heard another footstep. No one in the group wanted to turn around, not for fear of what might be behind them, but fear of what the others would say or do if one of them had turned chicken. Each of them was adamant about seeing this little creep's story until the very end. So maybe, Billy started again, maybe it is like a ghost of the little boy trying to find his heart. Don't turn around. Yes, that is what it is. Or perhaps... Johnny thought he heard another creak somewhere in the darkness behind him. He placated himself with thoughts of the wind and the growing storm outside. Far off into the distance, he could hear the rumble of thunder. Now don't turn around. Yes, it couldn't be the demon that my father said lived here. Oh yes, he says that it is still here, one in the heart of another poor soul who dares to stay in this house. Don't turn around! I'm sure I heard another footstep, but this time it sounded like something wet trying to pull itself across the floor. The others' eyes grew wide with the suspense of the moment. They all wanted to look to see what Johnny's reaction was, but none of them dared to turn to look for fear that it would be a sign of weakness. Maybe it is just someone coming down the stairs. No, wait. It isn't someone. It is something. Oh no, Billy said, fear beginning to creep into his voice. No, not that. Dead. It's been dead so very long. Now don't turn around. The decay, the odor, decay. You can almost smell it. Johnny whiffed the air and noticed that there was an odd sort of odor that had seemed to materialize from nowhere. He could feel his heart pounding a little more, yet he kept his eyes directly on Billy. Don't turn around. My father said that the demon could reach in and just pull your heart right out of your chest. Maybe that is who it is, Johnny. Maybe that is what is coming up behind you. No, don't turn around. Perhaps if you don't turn around, it'll go away. I can see it. Off in the blackness is just a form, a skeletal form with flesh dripping off its bones. Its eyes are like fire. It's looking right at you, Johnny. Right at the middle of your back. Just about where your heart is. Johnny tried to gulp down the fear that had begun to creep up in him. He wanted to turn around to see that there was nothing there, but he knew what the others would say. All he had to do was stop, and that would be the end of it. For some reason that only he knew, he could not stop. He could only continue to stare at Billy. Now, don't turn around, Johnny, Billy warned, his voice even more menacing. It's coming up behind you, Johnny. It is the demon, not the little boy. Now, don't turn around, Johnny. It's putting out its hand, a bony, white, skeletal hand towards your neck. It's pointing at your back, just where your heart is. It wants another heart, Johnny. It wants your heart, Johnny. It's getting closer and closer. It's only inches from touching you. Then with a scream, Johnny turned around. Ah! Isn't there anything else you can tell me? The detective was tired. It had been one of those nights when nothing was making any sense. He had a 13-year-old boy lying on a slab at the hospital, a look of sheer terror etched into his face, and a group of hysterical boys and parents all trying to tell him everything, but telling him nothing. Detective Matthews? Saved by the doctor. As the haggard man left the group, he looked at the doctor who had been working on the lifeless body of Johnny. You asked me to do an autopsy right away, the doctor said. Yeah, because something just doesn't feel right about this case. I know what you mean. It is the second boy that has died in that house, the doctor said. Yeah, I worked the first case, Detective Matthews remembered and shuddered. Well, I did the autopsy. Already? The detective asked. I didn't have to look far. Come in here. The doctor motioned the detective into the exam room. On the slab was the body of Johnny, his chest cut open, exposing his inner organs. So, what do you see? The doctor asked. I don't get it. I cut into a healthy chest with no signs of violence of any kind. That was what I found, or rather, didn't find, the doctor said, pointing to the body and the chest cavity. My God, the detective said. Yeah, the doctor said. There isn't a heart in there. My question is, what happened to it? And how the hell did it get out of the body with no physical marks? The detective went to the bathroom and threw up. Down the hallway, sitting by himself, Billy looked up. The demonic creature stood a few feet from him and smiled. Epilogue. The butler did it.